Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Crim 600. I hope you are enjoying what you're reading, and I hope you are figuring out that there's a lot to learn about criminological theories. Over the past couple of weeks, we've concentrated on the break from the classical traditions into the scientific world of positivistic criminology, and we reviewed at the same time the biological trait theories and the psychological trait theories. For this week, we're breaking from those trait theories and moving into the sociological theories. Now, the sociological theories cover a lot of ground, and the reason for that, at least the reason that I like to suggest, is that American criminology is really something that broke away from contemporary sociology. As academic disciplines go, sociology developed at the same time. All of those biological theories and psychological theories were developing, but when it came to explaining misbehavior or criminal behavior or deviant behavior, the sociologists really had a lot to explore. But European sociologists like Durkheim, and we'll talk a little bit about him and his context for understanding society and how society developed. That's one thing, but in American sociology, we had a lot of people who were in particular focused on studying crime and delinquency. And it's from those sociologists that American criminology broke free. And it really emerged as its own discipline away from those theories that were coming out of the biological and psychological disciplines. So, sociology is important to criminological theory for sure because of the theoretical foundations that Durkheim provides. But more interesting, American criminology broke away from American sociologists who were studying crime and delinquency. So we've got two real things to think about here. In your Volt book, I've asked you to consider two separate chapters. And in one chapter, we have really a discussion about the economics of crime, or more precisely, how economic relationships should be considered with the development of criminal behavior or the explanation of criminal behavior. And then strain theory, how they kind of go together, but they're very different. And one of the ways that they go together is a basic understanding of strain theory is that when people get frustrated, they might lead to a greater appreciation for or seek the opportunities for criminal behavior. Now, how do people get frustrated? Well, one simple thing is it's frustrating when you don't have money. And that's that connection to economics that we can explore. The lack of money, whether it's from unemployment or underemployment or just poverty in any sense of the term, that's a frustrating experience. We have our basic needs to satisfy our desire for shelter, our interest in satisfying hunger, and we have to pay for things in a modern society. So a lack of money is very frustrating. But strain theory is much more elaborate than that. And the presence of strain theory today is much more than just what do we do when we're poor? And could poverty or unemployment or lack of economic resources lead us to criminal behavior? There are a lot more subtleties to it, and I'd like you to consider those as you go through the readings. So here are a couple of things that I want to point out and kind of help you organize your thoughts as you get into the readings. When you see a discussion of Durkheim, I want you to think about all the things that he did. And in a lot of places, he's recognized as an important and influential person who helped develop academic sociology 150 years ago or more. While science was marching on, the pursuit of understanding the world through observation and testing and drawing conclusions from those tests and observations, Durkheim was trying to organize his thoughts about how society originated. And in Western Europe, and that's the foundation for our discipline, but certainly not the foundation for all modern societies, there was a lot going on. There was a lot to explore. Countries started to develop their own census data collection systems, and this was available for study by people who were sophisticated enough or interested enough in trying to understand how society was organized. And Durkheim was one of them. So he started to look at things in regards to the relationships that might be seen or observable in the data, where people lived, how they were organized, how they behaved in accordance to the laws, and how they avoided the laws and did what they wanted to do. Some of that we see as the development of culture, cultural expectations, cultural rules, and maybe even within cultures, we can identify subsets of rules, and we talk about subcultures. But all those political and social relationships had something to do with influencing culture. And we recognize that we have a dominant culture, but how does a dominant culture get to be a culture? Well, Durkheim wrote about all of that. And one of the things that we get from his theories about how society was organized are those mechanical and organic societies and the distinctions or differences that we might see across them. I want you to look for that. I want you to see what's going on there, because a mechanical society is one where everybody follows the same rules, sort of without even thinking about it. It's indoctrinated within our being. It's our appreciation for the cultural expectations. Now, a mechanical society is something that Durkheim reflected on as the status or structure or organization of Western civilization for millennia. For thousands of years, we had the same set of structural expectations. Men did what men did, women did what women did, and children did what their parents did. That happened for generations and generations, and then something happened. Western Europe experienced the Industrial Revolution, and that changed society, not just the economics or the politics of society, but the relationships that individuals had with the rest of their surroundings, how they related to each other, but more importantly, how they were integrated in society. And he described these newer developing expectations as evidence of an organic society where different roles, different rules were being developed. The difference between a mechanical and organic society is not something where it's either or. Durkheim explained this as happening across a continuum, where we move from a mechanical to an organic society, but it can go back and forth as time marches on. The problem was that as society shifted, it shifted rapidly. As I mentioned, for thousands of years, we all did the same thing. But then, in the course of 100 or 200 years, or sometimes in just a few decades, large-scale changes happened. And that was confusing to people. As new rules for behavior and new aspects of society developed, it was confusing. And Durkheim described that confusion as anomie. It was a state of normlessness. Not so much that there were no norms or no rules for behavior, but that our culture had not agreed upon what the dominant rule system should be. And as human beings, we like to be regulated. As much as we want to say we want to be free, and we hear that a lot these days, we want the freedom to pursue our own interests. Human beings are relatively comfortable when they are controlled, and not necessarily oppressed, but controlled by the people and the circumstances that surround them. That's the mechanical society that Durkheim described. When we are doing the same things as our parents and our grandparents and great-grandparents, we're living by a set of rules that we don't even have to consider. We abide by them, we comply, and it's comfortable. We know what's expected, we know what to do. But in an organic society, the rules are changing rapidly, and that rapid change causes confusion. We don't know what we expect to be, we don't know what we are expected to do, and we lose that sense of unmitigated regulation. And that's a painful experience. And that's the anomie that he described. And I want you to try to look through that reading and see what that means to you. How comfortable could a set of rules be, even if looking back at them, we see them as sort of a rigid foundation for society. But it regulated behavior. And for all of its strengths, all of its weaknesses, it controlled society. And that's an aspect that doesn't necessarily come into a lot of discussions about strain theory, that society controlled its members and members were controlled by these social mandates. But as American sociology kind of progressed, we have this landmark essay, Social Structure and Anomie, in 1938 by Robert Merton. And I want you to think about the nature of Robert Merton and how he used that term, anomie, a little bit differently than Durkheim. The best understanding for me, and what I'd like to share with you, is a little bit of personal history about Robert Merton. Robert Merton was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, and he grew up in a working class neighborhood, I believe outside of Philadelphia, or it could be inside Philadelphia. But I want you to imagine the type of person who could write a landmark essay in 1938 and what he experienced before he got to 1938 when this was published. You can imagine that he was a young academician. In 1938, I think he was in his late 20s. He wasn't 30 yet. And he was the son of these immigrants who might not speak the language well, who might have ethnic expectations for him and for all of their friends and family members to abide by. And there's the Great Depression. You can imagine if I think he was 26, 27 in 1938, that he lived through the Great Depression, and that had an important influence on his ideas. So think about that when you read through what he wrote. And what he wrote about is the foundation for what we describe as strain theory. Even though anomie is in the title, it's not the same anomie that Durkheim wrote about. I think this was intentional. Merton used the term anomie because he was a sociologist and he was trying to ground his new ideas in the history of sociology. And everyone in 1938 knew and appreciated the importance and influence of Durkheim and his work on anomie. So Merton probably used that in his title intentionally. But instead of that disruption with the social expectations, Merton wrote about it as the disjunction between goals and means. You have to figure out what that means. It means to most of us as American citizens, especially the son of immigrants, there are institutionalized goals for success and power and financial well-being. And there are expected means to achieve that success. You have to play by the rules. You have to get an education. You have to do well in a good job that can support you and your family. Now, it's that sort of expectation that led Merton to say when there's this disjunction between goals and means, people will feel frustrated. It's not so much the disorganized coordination of social rules that Durkheim was writing about. It's this personal sense of frustration within the emerging American culture of the 20th century. And that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality is something that had to have been near and dear to Merton's heart. And that's what he wrote about. And he said when people experience this sort of dislocation, the disjunction between goals and means, they will be frustrated. And he wrote about different adaptations to that frustration or anomie. And one of them was innovation. People will come up with new strategies to achieve those goals. And once they do that, it will probably include violation of the law. Now, there are other things that he wrote about too. Most of us comply. Most of us just get by knowing that we might not achieve our goals and it could be frustrating, but we just comply. Other individuals will respond to that stress and strain of anomie, that disjunction between goals and means, by substance use or retreating. We get a dead-end job and we're not happy with it, but we just keep doing it anyway. And the final one would be rebellion. We have an appreciation for what the goals and the means are, but we don't like them. And we try to come up with a new form for society. Now that function for strain theory lasted from 1938 up until the 1980s and 1990s. And that's when criminology came forward with a different version of strain theory. Now, theories get recirculated, rejuvenated, revived, revised all the time. And Robert Agnew came up with general strain theory. Over the course of the 1970s and 80s, there was some disputes over how we might be able to operationalize or use our research methodologies to document and understand and scientifically test strain theory as Merton described it. But it wasn't really working out. Most of the studies were done on juvenile delinquents, and juvenile delinquents certainly have different expectations for goals and means than the generalized society that Merton was writing about. What we consider as adults who need to satisfy our economic desires or our own personal goals is very different from the immediate sense of goals that most adolescents have. And that's where Agnew's theory breaks off. I want you to look for a couple of things in Agnew's theory too. How he conceptualized strain, because it's very different from just a breakdown in goals and means. There are many different sources for strain. And then what happens when people feel strain? You feel stress, you feel strain, you get frustrated. I do too. We're human beings. We have expectations that go unmet, but most of us don't break the law. Most of us don't become those innovators. Most of us don't try to form a new society to make ourselves feel better. Most of us just keep doing what we're supposed to do. Well, how do we do that? Well, Agnew's theory gets into that a little bit because it brings in a social psychological approach that helps us understand the availability of coping mechanisms. When we feel stressed out, what do? Some of us freak out. Some of us get frustrated and get to that tipping point, or the pot boils over, or the balloon bursts, or something, and we have a breakdown, and that can include criminal behavior. But most of us get by. Most people develop coping mechanisms to deal with strain. Agnew wrote about that. And he said, in the absence of positive coping mechanisms, people who are frustrated, people who do experience strain, will go on and engage in crime and delinquency. But it's those coping mechanisms that are important in breaking that connection. So that's an important theory, and I've asked you to read a little bit about that. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about how important you think that is. Now, I did include on the Moodle page an extra reading. You don't have to do it, but I will encourage you to read it. It's one that I wrote with one of our former students. He was he earned his bachelor's degree, his master's degree, and his PhD from IUP. And we did that while he was a master's student. And it was a fun little project for me. I still like talking to him. And I think it was fun and influential for him. But here's the idea that might be fun for you. I know all the problems with it. I know all the errors. Despite the fact that it got published, I know how it could be better. So I want to challenge you to see if you can use your skills to identify what we did right and what could have been better. I won't say it's wrong, but there are opportunities for it to be better. So go ahead and read that and challenge me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Then the only other thing that we have to consider here is another modern twist on anomie theory or strain theory that came out of the 1990s. And it's more of a macro level theory. So it's back to those cultural roots and understanding how society changes. And Messner and Rosenfeld wrote this book about institutional anomie and how the culture of America and our pursuit of me first and economics first, very status driven, how that can be influential on deviant behavior and criminal behavior. It is definitely a sociological perspective, and I want you to see that. So the readings that your classmates will be reviewing and the readings that are in the folder for additional research, those are all focused on tests of general strain theory. The other readings out of the textbooks, those go along with all the other things that I've already mentioned today. So I'm looking forward to seeing your comments, and I hope you get a chance to view this video. I hope it helps guide your note-taking and your understanding of the theory. I like strain theory, but really, I like them all. I really do enjoy teaching this class and hearing about all these theories. So I hope you enjoy it too, and enjoy it. Get by. Get done. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.